Hello, and welcome to another one of my book reviews. And today, I want to talk to you about 1632 by Eric Flint, the first of the Ring of Fire novels. This came out back in 2000, and it deals with the town of Grantville, West Virginia, suddenly finding itself thrust back into 1631. I mean, it does wind up crossing over into 1632, but hundreds of years prior. And like I said, the Ring of Fire series kind of kicked off with a bunch of sequels. The Grantville Gazettes, which is like a fanzine of sorts, although it was edited by Eric Flint, and the Ring of Fire short story collections. I've heard that this has a huge following online, and I figured, a nice fish out of water kind of story sounds interesting, so I wanted to pick it up and check it out. I've had this leather bound or bonded leather copy for a few years now, which is signed by the now late Eric Flint. So I figured I'd give it a read, and I gotta say I was a little underwhelmed, but I'll get more to that in a second. So as I was saying, the idea of Ring of Fire is that Grantville, West Virginia, finds itself suddenly thrust back in time to the early mid 1600s. They find themselves in the Holy Roman Empire in Thuringia, kind of near Brandenburg. Here's the Holy Roman Empire. The Holy Roman Empire. Back in the middle of the 30 Years' War. And I kind of figured, it'd be an interesting take as the town fights for survival or tries to figure out what the hell's going on, or, just try to come to terms with everything. And, they just kind of do it immediately. But more on that in a second. One thing I will say, and this is not to say that the rest of the novel wasn't entertaining, it was still a fun novel to read, but the prologue was so much more interesting than the rest of the novel. The prologue, very short, 2 pages, 3 pages here, goes into what happened that sent the town of Grantville, West Virginia, back those hundreds of years. And it was an art project. Some futuristic society wanted to do a little bit of art where they just kind of grabbed, this nice little ring of fire, or a bubble, I guess, because the mines underneath the mining town, were also taken, and just throwing it back with complete disregard to what it would do for the universe. Thankfully for those in Grantville, it kind of sends them into an alternate reality, so they're not really concerned with how their actions could impact the future. But yeah, I mean, like I said, it's kind of fun to have read this after having just recently read Wayward Pines by Blake Crouch, because both titles, both this and the Wayward Pines trilogy, deal with isolated towns completely differently. So I guess Wayward Pines did it in a great way. Like, what if this town is completely isolated from those around them? How are they going to react? And I feel like they react logically. They react with actual raw emotion. Whereas here, the town of Grantville just kind of goes with the flow. They're all at a wedding when the event occurs, and very early on they find a woman being raped by soldiers. And they just, with, basic disregard for, any sort of morals, just absolutely kill those soldiers. And they don't really seem to be affected by the fact that they just took human life. And that's going to be a recurring theme throughout the whole novel. They just, they're like, oh, I guess we're in the past now. This is where we're going to be. And when it comes to slaughtering their opponents, they just do so. I mean, I know it's a town of hunters, and so, they are fine with firearms, but they just seem so nonchalant about their murder. And I guess that's part of my other problem that I had with the novel, is that they never seem to have any struggles. I mean, power and like gasoline and just fuel might be a problem, but their power plant also came back with them. And they say, oh, we're going to have to start cutting back and making rations. But there are events in the end, and only sparingly using gasoline. But there is, a plot point later in the novel where a school bus is intercepted, like to save the children on the school bus. And I'm thinking, is the school bus really a necessity if you're trying to preserve gas? I mean, the kids, it's like not a big town. The kids can walk to school, but whatever. It almost reminded me of, if you're playing a video game, if you're a gamer or you play any RPGs, when your character gets all like beefed up and over leveled, and you might go back into like a starting area where you just completely glaze over any enemies in your way. That's what it felt like for the citizens of Grantville. They just decimate all the enemies in front of them. Like there's never any tension in the battles. I mean, the battles are fun, I guess, if you wanted to read about a one-sided battle, but they just completely decimate their enemies. And I mean, there is a battle, there are events in the final act that I think are where the most tension arises, and that's because the Grantville soldiers are kind of caught off guard, and I'm like, holy crap, what's going to happen? And then they find out that they're off guard, and they quickly turn things around, and then the tension's gone again, and you're just like, well, okay, that was something. And speaking of there not being much tension, you would think like a fish out of water. You think people finding themselves either hundreds of years in the past or dealing with a society that's hundreds of years from the future would cause more culture shock. But I mean, it really doesn't. All of the people who join the town seem to get caught up with technology or get caught up or accustomed to the ways pretty quickly. Which, I mean, even with the language, I mean, there is a slight language barrier. I mean, in terms of, ancient German, not ancient, but, older German and modern English, there's a little language barrier. But one of the characters does speak English. I mean, she is kind of a well-to-do character who, does speak multiple languages. But there's hardly any culture shock, despite the fact that there's hundreds of years of difference. I mean, societal difference, technological difference, all sorts of differences. And they just kind of catch up immediately. I don't know. I guess I see the idea being there, and I understand how this can, kickstart a huge popular series, especially with all the sequels it has. Because, I mean, the idea is certainly there, and maybe it is better executed in some of the sequels. I just personally wasn't wowed with how it came off in 1632. I mean, it's still worth a read. It's I will say it's not terribly dry reading material, except there are chapters involving King Adolphus, Gustavus Adolphus, the king. And let me tell you, Gustavus's chapters have some crazy historical exposition dumped on you. Gustavus Adolphus, right there. Those chapters are a little dry and a little tough to read. But I mean, overall, I mean, it's it doesn't necessarily need the hardcover treatment that I got here. But it's one of those little turn your brain off and read a little pulpy paperback. You can have a fun time here at 1632. Like I said, I'm very late to the party. There's a million sequels out there already. I mean, Eric Flint, who has since passed, has built this huge kind of universe for his books. So if you are a fan, I mean, there's a lot to dive into. Personally, I don't think I'm actually going to follow through with any of the sequels. I kind of got enough with 1632 here. And I wasn't really impressed enough to want to read more. But if you want to read a little bit of alternate history, a little kind of science fiction in that regard, where a town is thrust back a couple hundred years, then 1632 might be for you. Just kind of keep in mind that you are going to get a lot of one-sided battles, as one might expect. You're not going to get as much tension. But anyways, I have plenty of other book reviews on the channel here, so please consider liking and subscribing. Plenty of book reviews and unboxing videos to hold you over as well in the meantime. But thank you very much for watching, and we'll see you around next time.